Federal authorities identified the man who blew up the Cybertruck as 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberger of Colorado Springs. They say he was not on the FBI's radar and did not have a criminal history. They say ultimately, this appears to be a tragic case of suicide involving a highly decorated combat veteran who was struggling with PTSD.
New Orleans police released an edited, dramatic body camera video showing 42-year-old suspect Shamsud Din Jabbar immediately opening fire on officers just moments after he plowed through a crowd on Bourbon Street, killing 14 and injuring dozens.
We begin with breaking news this evening. 2 National Guardsmen in critical condition after being shot in Washington, D.C. One suspect taken into custody.
Sir, this will be treated at the federal level as an assault on a federal law enforcement officer. The FBI will lead out on that mission with our interagency partners, to include the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, ATF, DEA.
We now know that the Minneapolis shooter, Robert Westman, was a mentally disturbed young man who, at the age of 17, with the approval of his mother, went trans and changed his name to Robin.
Joshua John, a 29-year-old, has been identified in this Dallas ICE facility shooting. Had comments about anti-ICE being written on some of the bullet casings. 2 people were killed in the shooting. The suspect also deceased.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air because ABC News has confirmed conservative activist and podcaster Charlie Kirk has been shot during an event at Utah Valley University. The founder of Turning Point USA, a conservative student organization.
Breaking news just moments ago. 4 people who were allegedly planning a bomb attack on businesses across Southern California for New Year's Eve have been arrested. The Turtle Island Liberation Front, a far-left, pro-Palestine, anti-government and anti-capitalist group, was preparing to conduct a series of bombings against multiple targets in California beginning on New Year's Eve. The group also planned to target ICE agents and vehicles.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Lipson, and I'm joined today with Michael Hoffman. Eduardo is not here yet, but he may be here in the next hour. And he'll be coming from Mexico City, and he's stuck in traffic after watching Avatar 3 in 4D, apparently, not just your seat moves and everything like that. Normally I'm coming here from Oakland, but today I'm coming from Tucson because Brandy and I are traveling around in Arizona where we might live. Anyway, I forgot to say some other things, which is What's Left is online at what'sleftpodcast.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, and turn on your notifications. Share your favorite episode and jot down our information wherever you found this episode. You can also order shirts from me if you want by going to that online website at what'sleftpodcast.com. But in addition to Andy and Michael, we have John Klyczek here today. Again, John is author of School Word Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, now in both English and Japanese, and I'll maybe show that as well. And also a frequent contributor to Unlimited Hangout. So welcome again to What's Left, Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Always good to be here.
Yep. Anyhow, one of the things we're talking about today is Operation Gladio, and it was something that you had asked to maybe bring up a few months ago, and it's something you thought would be worth really talking about in light of what's happening right now in the United States and even throughout the world. And so before we get started into talking about Operation Gladio, can you say a little bit about why you think it's important for people to know about this, which was a CIA operation done many, many years ago, but has a long history to it?
Yeah. First, I'll say that I would have liked to. This will be one of those your favorite episodes where, this isn't something that I've written about extensively. So, most of my thoughts are not as ironed out as I like them to be, right? So, but I think pretty sure I did. first started mentioning like Gladio 2.0 or like a new season of Operation Gladio was going to be characteristic of the Trump administration. I believe I was telling you, I know I've discussed it with other people, at least as far back as when we had the episode. I don't on when we did that Trump episode, was that right after he got elected in 2024? I think it was, right?
Yeah.
It was after he got elected, right?
Hmm.
But you had known that I had been telling you that I thought that he was going to win, right? And then
Yep.
we discussed all that in that episode. Um, I feel like part of that discussion, and I don't know if you recall it or not, would have been me also suggesting that this was going to be part of this operation. So we covered a lot of stuff like Christian nationalism and
Yep.
Christian Zionism in that episode, which is panned out, right? And I don't know if we might even mention the Gladio thing in that episode. But I know that if I hadn't talked about it with you, it was with other people. That would be another feature of this administration. And it's I think it's we've seen examples of it almost from the get-go because um what was the Tesla incident
Hmm.
right outside Trump Tower, and there's just been a lot of we'll just call them incidents. This is an episode
And
we're
the
talking about
incident
fall.
of the dude running his car into the crowd in New Orleans or something like that.
No. This is when somebody this is going to be an episode that's going to trigger all sorts of keywords. So we're talking about all kinds of false flags, etc. So I'm like, I guess this will be incoherent if I try to use euphemisms
No,
for
just
the
go for
entire
it.
discussions. I'm just going to have to just use words that I'm sure are going to get it flagged. But yeah, so the guy that blew up the Tesla in front of the Trump Towers, right? And there was it was a really weird situation. He was supposedly ex-military. Sean Ryan supposedly had the inside lane on what was going on. It was just a lot of whoop-de-hoo about it. But
Right. But remember, Jake, hold
that, and then
on,
there was
because there was a dude who was also trained in a military base who rammed his car through a whole group of people during New Year's celebrations or
Yeah.
something around that time. Like
Yeah.
that was another episode where people were wondering if this dude
Okay.
was like MK Ultra.
Yeah. Well, right. Okay. So 2 examples. We could use many examples this year. The alleged Tyler Robinson incident, whether I say alleged because who knows if he's a patsy or whatever, then there was the
Right.
trans shooter before that, or the alleged, I'm just going to say alleged because we don't know how many of these people are like you said, like patsies or MK Ultra or whatever. But lots of events, okay, violent events, you know, uh,
The
that can
recent
be
shootings in
labeled as
Australia.
terrorist events. Correct. Yes. What's that?
Recent shootings in Australia.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to put too many irons on the fire, but so I'm just saying that you could kind of see that domestically, right, for our local audience, right?
Right.
Like lots of stuff happening, like lots of with lots of questions around them,
Right.
right? And this is Gladio was also known as the strategy of tension. And the idea was that they wanted to radicalize people on the left, sort of like a COINTELPRO type operation, but with the goal of radicalizing people or setting them up entirely.
Before you go back,
prior.
before you go into Operation Gladio, because here's what I'd like to do, because I think you knew more about it than I did, and maybe Michael. So I'd like to say what me and Michael know about it, like Operation Gladio, and then you fill in the stuff, because I think it'll be better because you've known about this. You've been thinking about this stuff longer than me. And I think one of the reasons why you brought it up was you were saying 2 things you were telling me about the Trump administration, in addition to the rise of Christian nationalism and anti-Zionism being equated with anti-Judaism and being criminalized and things like that. You also said that under Trump, it might be difficult to be saying left-wing things. You might be more of a target to be saying left-wing things. And that's going to be important subtext to why you're bringing up Operation Gladio, because what you were saying, what you're getting at is that some of these events people are hearing that happen over here, happen over there, they may seem disconnected, but there is a history of the US government doing things like this around the globe, as well, possibly in the United States. I do think it's happened in the United States. And that these seemingly disconnected violent events all have a center to them. And the center is not, oh, it's just a violent time. There is a political center to them that has a purpose behind it, which you're bringing up, like the strategy of tension and things like that. So I think that's what you're getting at, is all these events you're hearing about, we've only touched on a few, very well may not just be random acts of violence. And there's reason to believe that they aren't, in relationship to when you look at how Tyler Robinson's case and his so-called assassination of or killing of Kirk is being used to attack far left and things like that. There's a history here that of going backwards. And so that's what I think, that to me is the context of our discussion today.
Yes, correct. And the main thing that the strategy of tension is driving or buttressing is the rise of an authoritarian police state, right? The law and order, criminal justice, it's the old school right wing law and order politics meets AI predictive analytics, like what's the Philip K. Dick movie, Minority Report type pre-crime stuff, right? And also buttressing that with or dovetailing that with our global military operations as well, right? So the police state for domestic military police state operations, but then also, right, because as we'll discuss, this was the domestic theater and the global theater are always intertwined, right? What they do there, eventually they bring here, and usually what's done over there is the boogeyman to crack down here, and things that are done here are to get us to support what we do over here, right? And so, but yeah, so the goal ultimately, like, because there's gonna be a lot of players, right? There's gonna be a lot of players in the story. But I would say that one thing that ultimately is clearly an outcome that's desired from all of the chaos is to create police state, under the guise of preventing terror, right? Both nationally and internationally, basically.
Right.
Nationally and globally.
Right. And to create terror, to justify a war on terror, which is then justified war abroad and war at home on your own population. So when you talked about this first, you had mentioned a BBC documentary, and I'll put a link to the description of that BBC documentary on Operation Gladio. But some of the things that I'm going to be referring to as I learned about it is basically a series put out by the real left, and this guy named Rusere, Shoniwa, was basically writing a review of a book by Paul L. Williams, Operation Gladio, The Unholy Alliance Between the Vatican, the CIA, and the Mafia. So from reading this, and again, I'll put a description of that. Here is my thumbnail of Operation Gladio that I got. And then Michael, you can fill in what you want. And then Jake, you fill in the rest. And you can even say like, hey, this is where I don't agree or blah, blah, blah. So Operation Gladio starts out of World War II, when the United States and Russia and Soviet Union had defeated the Nazis, but the Nazis needed a place to go. And well-placed Nazis who were asked to stay behind in case the Soviets came in were picked up by United States and the United States OSS basically picked them up and said, "Hey, you need a place to work. You want to fight the Soviets and the possible invasion that might be coming in Europe. Now that we've defeated you, you willing to work for us?" They said yes. And essentially, these people who are called stay-behinds acted as what they were said to be acting as a group of people just in case the Soviet Union invaded Europe. In point of fact, it seemed like they were fighting left-wing movements within Europe themselves, and they were supported by the CIA. The writings of this guy, Paul Williams, also says the CIA funded this stuff illegally with drug money. heroin money and things like that. But also tried to draw in the Vatican did draw in the Vatican into this, drew in the mafia into this, because again, this is a whole criminal enterprise headed up by the CIA, and also like when there was a rise of left wing groups, particularly in Italy, that's when they started doing things like kidnapping officials and assigning that kidnapping to leftists like the Red Brigades, or making explosions happen at the Bologna train station, killing 84 people. They ascribed that to the Red Brigades. Again, various terrorist acts that their Gladio members had done, or at least tried to initiate, if not done, and they were going to pin them on other groups. And this was just a few things. I mean, there was a long history, apparently, or many, many other events that might have happened within Europe and certainly within Italy. And basically, it was a terror campaign to try to create terror that would make people more rely on the state as their benefactor, as their savior, as their sense of security, and then the state could then justify its own crackdown. And the interesting difference between the BBC documentary, which just deals with Europe, I think the series put out by Paul Williams seems to talk about like Operation Gladio in South America, like Operation Condor, or things like that. He says like there was like an Operation Gladio version in South America that the U.S. used. I found that very interesting, and that for me it was fascinating that even like a lot of the attacks on libertarian theologians, like the Catholic priests who were trying to fight a lot of these, authoritarian governments, those people were actually helped being taken down by the Catholic Church themselves. And Pope Francis himself, everyone who loves Pope Francis, he was a guy who apparently was like name names so they could grab Catholic priests in Argentina, torture them. And even those priests said, yeah, no, Pope Francis, the guy who's going to become Pope Francis, is a guy who tried to, get me tortured. And everyone loves this guy. And now he's gone, I guess. But so this series does a lot to also talk about the criminality of the CIA, the mafia, and the Vatican together. But it really does point out that the state is often the biggest purveyor of violence, to then justify its own use of violence in trying to keep people safe from violence. And that's that strategy of tension. So that was what I took away from it. And Michael, if you want to add, or any other thoughts you had in terms of things you might have known.
I do. I'm really glad this was brought to our attention, because to me it's actually a really important view into the development of the institutions like the CIA and NATO, because the Operation Gladio was launched around when these things were formed, right? So the global political situation at the time is that the U.S. has to ally with the USSR to defeat the Nazis at the end of World War II, right? So the U.S. and sections of the ruling, U.S. elites are very clear, like we have to immediately try and distance ourselves from this communist stuff. The other thing that's not, the other thing I want to bring into it is that there was also at that time, a strong workers' movement, right? You had the Soviet Union essentially helping to defeat fascism, helped in some context help re-legitimize the whole idea of the Soviet project. So they had on their hands, an organized working class where radical ideas were still somewhat embedded in them. And so the Operation Gladio, to me, is a response to the perceived need that when they say they will need to beat back a communist invasion, what they mean broadly is any broadly kind of anti-capitalist or communal type ideas that, and that ends up being what this is about. So the methods that they use and the Paul Williams book, and then the Substack piece on the Paul Williams book, goes through in detail the development of the specific mechanisms through which they basically were able to raise money that does not appear on any government budget, right? So there's no like government budget line of like subvert all working class movement, right? So this also then the development of sort of this large scale using drug money to fund this covert, like this is where it got its large scale implementation. Like they worked out how to do this kind of stuff in this post-war period, which makes sense because the United States, everybody was destroyed except for the United States, right? So this is the development of the U.S. really fully implementing its methods of control, which included, by the way, actually not by the way, which included building off of things that the Nazis themselves had developed. So the reason why, like the idea for a stay behind unit comes from the Nazis themselves, where they called them werewolf units, and I can't remember the name of the person who's credited with that. But basically, the idea of a werewolf unit was that after it would basically be like people who were pretending to be civilians who at night would act, would carry out military operations, that they would hide caches of weapons, and for the Nazis, it was after the Allies took over territory, you'd have ostensibly civilian people who would stay behind in order to fight. And that idea basically became embedded in what in what it meant for NATO membership. So it turns out that apparently that in order for member states to join NATO, remember NATO is basically we need an anti-Soviet bloc, allied with the U.S. NATO essentially represents the anti-communist front against the USSR, and apparently setting up these covert networks of essentially essentially militias, right? So they're basically militias. That setting these things up and training these people becomes part of what it means to join NATO, but also then this whole apparatus grows up around spreading them and developing them, including like the secret societies, like the P2 group in Italy, which is talked about a lot.
Those are Freemasons.
Right, Freemasons, right. So it puts it in context a lot of the stuff that is often pointed to as like, oh, just like fringe conspiracy theories, and it actually gives it a real material root. Like it actually connects a lot of things together, which is that we know that they need violence in order to impose this world system on it, which is that world system is and has been the US-led, European-centered, US-led, European, US-centric financial system that disproportionately benefits profits for those companies for the capitalists within those countries. And so it makes it also clear to me the connection between kind of organized crime and the state, which is that and this made me think of a conversation we were having before about like the cartels. And now more than ever, it's clear to me that that because bourgeois democracy, right? So because capitalism has to pretend that it's democratic, you have to, they basically, of course, have this whole hidden set of methods for carrying out violence, right? They have to have that. And in order to fund that, you need things like people who are outlaws, so you can essentially distance yourself from them politically when you need to, or pretend that you're not doing business with them, but really their whole main function is to essentially, hold on. Hey, sorry, excuse me. basically,
their whole main function.
Right. Well, so like this also explains why is it that opium production skyrockets when the U.S. takes over the areas in Afghanistan. It's because they need that essentially to fund their covert violence.
Yeah.
So the whole like a connection between those kinds of like things that I hadn't necessarily understood the connection between them so much. And the idea that of course the idea that this is somehow in the past is, I think is absurd. But there's another incredible another very credible person, Colonel Towner. Her interviews I found very illuminating. But I mean, this is someone who is deeply involved in the military in various ways. It started to expose Operation Gladio, and her claim was like many of the big recent terrorist attacks were actually traced back to Operation Gladio, and not just a long time ago, but like the big train. I don't know if you remember, but remember the big train bombing in London?
Yep.
There was a big train bombing in Spain, and several other large scale like terrorist attacks are tied directly back to Operation Gladio because of specific materials that they used that were only issued through NATO, like C4, and I just feel like this is the place where these things are now documented and open, and it's another key area where, like, if you think somehow we live in a place where or we live in a world where there's not actual conspiracy at the top, then this is just another area where now they've had to admit it. Essentially, you have court cases, you have all kinds of people actually getting in trouble because some aspect of this thing that was supposed to be covert got exposed. And of course, none of the actual powerful people are brought to justice around it, but now it's well documented that they did this, and they carried out essentially internal terrorist attacks to ensure that no real meaningful opposition. This is also in connection to the COINTELPRO. All that stuff was to prevent any real opposition to the US-led financial hegemony and the whole neoliberal capitalist order that developed in the later part of the century, to prevent any kind of organized fight back from emerging. And they have, and it was very effective.
So that's a lot to respond to, Jake. So go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I mean, I was just taking note because I knew I decided to take some notes on while you're both talking and give you some options of where y'all maybe would like to go from here.
Yeah.
So a couple things to note. So one is that Gladio had multiple phases, right? At least two clear phases. And one was first to prevent the Soviet invasion, right? Immediately following World War II, the end of the war. But then at a certain point, the main threat became, the main concern was more about sort of popular democracy, resulting in the Communist Party, at least in Italy, as for one particular example, where kind of reached a climax with, I think was it Aldo Moro was the politician that was trying to unite the Christian Democrats and the Communist Party. Wanted to bring the Communist Party and make it like a legit party and have it be, in the governing process, and was ultimately assassinated and blamed it on the left, etc. It comes out that I think it was one of these various right-wing extremist groups. I want to say it was the New Ordine Nuovo, which basically means new order, like new world order, but during that phase, it was more about preventing domestic sort of populist adoption of communism or some form of far left politics, right? Or any form of leftist politics that would, check the oligarchy. So I think that's worth noting, because I think the tactics were slightly different, right? During those two times. But then the other thing that we could note is this right-wing kind of coalition, I guess you would call it, it very much mirrors what we see on the right today in a lot of ways, like, or at least the American right. And I think you would find similar dynamics if you would look at far-right politics in any given country at this time, right? So you have the traditional conservative establishment, right? Sort of your business class type people, your capitalist class, whatever, okay, that may or may not have any religious bones about them, right? But then you have like the Catholic, in particular, the Catholics, right? But more broadly speaking, sort of the Christians. And then you have like the fascist Nazis, like the hangover Nazis, right? And then you have like various occult secret societies, right? And some of these overlap, right? The Nazis had their Thule Society. You mentioned, I think it was the Masonic P2 Lodge, Propaganda Due Lodge. And then in the Catholic Church, there's the Opus Dei. From a left-wing perspective, you might think of them all as sort of like all cut from the same wood, I guess, but they're not necessarily. This is part of the strategy of tension, kind of holds all that together in certain ways, right? Like there's papal decrees that Masonry is like, can't, if you're involved in Masonry, then you're not a Catholic, right? So there's ways in which the strategy of tension holds these people together. And I'll just, as a quick example of like today, what I see as a similar example is like, you have Trump at the center of this MAGA movement, but then you have this infighting with like Candace and Tucker and Nick Fuentes and right, and all these people, and it's like, pick a team, but they're all support Trump basically for the most part, right? I mean, maybe one or two of them might have just recently, like, actually for the first time said something that sounded like it was critical, right? So then why are they all attached to Trump? What do they have in common? What they have in common is that they're all against the left. It's their opposition to the left, whatever that means for any one of those groups, but just in general, like any kind of left of center politics. And so that strategy of tension, right? Like it holds like these disparate parts of the right together in a block, because right, they can all go, oh, they have the common enemy, the common boogeyman. Today it's the woke, the cultural Marxists, we have different words for it, right? But it's essentially that same thing. And then I want to maybe at some point talk about, because Michael, you mentioned COINTELPRO. I want to at some point maybe talk about, I want to tie this into COINTELPRO Gladio, but I also want to try to tie it into another episode that we did where we talked about Michael Aquino's Mind Wars and interactive internet activities. And sort of, and this will also bring in the because you mentioned MK Ultra. This will also bring all three of those together in a way that I think hopefully illustrates the geography of the strategy of tension in the current time and space that we're in. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm gonna let y'all, I don't know, go wherever. And
we'll do a few things. First, we'll welcome Eduardo here officially. Good to see you, Eduardo. I'm glad you got it for that episode.
You're like those professors that pause the entire class just when one person comes in late. When I wish those professors would just carry on.
Okay, we will.
But he was so nice about it. He didn't stop to scold you.
No, but I had a few of those professors back in college.
I'm not going to go backwards and try to recover, but I think you'll come in along the way.
Yeah,
but I do. Before, Jake, we move on to today, I want to go back to still that past time, because there are some questions I have about even the strategy, what was going on then. Because you have to understand, like, we haven't said it, but while there's this giant Gladio state apparatus in the West, and that's under construction, on the other side, there's the Stasi of East Germany, and there's the KGB of the Soviet Union. There are apparatuses on both sides, and And that Communist Party, I don't know that Communist Party in Italy, but what I can tell you is I know for a fact that it was not a threat to the capitalists. Like, if you know what I'm saying, like it represents no fundamental, like true challenge to their power in the way that I want a true challenge to their power to be built from below that I call communism, but isn't that. It's not whatever that party thing to do it, what they were doing. And that's an interesting piece to this because there's a strategy of tension operating on both sides of the Iron Curtain, right? Because and and it. So I just want if there's something you can say about that because it's a kind of a mind fuck for me a little bit about how much like how much they're counting on calling a boogeyman who's not a boogeyman, who's literally doing literally the same thing under a different name but also doing their own strategy of tension in their country or their region to maintain their hold and to frighten people into saying you have to come to us, otherwise the West will do this, And so I don't know if anybody wants to say something, but can you say how do you see? I'll just say it. How do you understand that? Because it's kind of not confusing, but that communism that they were fighting wasn't a threat to them in a sense.
Right. Well, okay. So does anybody else want to?
I just want to say that the thing you just said, Andy, also applies to CPUSA to me. Right.
Right.
So like and like you talked about with Aaron Leonard, like they put a lot of effort into completely dismantling CPUSA long after it had basically started telling people to vote Democrat. I mean, so
Right. Good point.
And I just wanted to also like the timing of basically the destruction of Europe after the Second World War and the US essentially seizing that opportunity is also, is also to me explains why they're looking ahead, right? They want to prevent anything developing to check their power because there actually had been powerful movements, and it's like the international movement was on decline at the same time as the US was building its power, and so I see those things going together. But I don't actually have the answer to your question. Like I have that same question, Andy. I just know like clearly even just the having any idea of communism or having any kind of like reference to somehow workers controlling things seems like it's enough of a threat to completely destroy it. But like now, what is NATO doing? They're trying to isolate Russia, which isn't even communist, right? It's sort of like anything that threatens the specific power is they're gonna do what they can to essentially dismantle it. And the details, there is a lot of devil in the details, and I appreciate John's comment that there's these disparate forces who are brought together in opposition to these things. And it's not like all of these people are the same, but I see them as part of the same dynamic because I view these things structurally, not just like psychologically or religiously. There's a reason why these various different actors have common interests and they come together around these things. And it's actually an intricate and kind of fascinating thing to unravel all these different connections, which included like, the way that the Vatican's financial system that they had set up was particularly useful because it wasn't under any specific government. And so then the Vatican ends up playing like this huge role in funding all of this covert military stuff. And that's just one example. But I guess the other point I wanted to say is that it's not that there's just these secret societies that exist and then they come together around. It's that they are actually built. To me, it seems like these things were built out of this. It wasn't just that there was these static things that existed and then they started working on Gladio. It's that they actually built secret societies because they had to figure out how to implement this thing, which had huge state backing, but it couldn't be public. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Jake, go ahead.
Definitely at this point in the game, under the Trump administration, the way they are behaving with this, I'm just going to call it accelerationist because that's what it is, but we might need to unpack that term. This just this hardcore, like, libertarian, corporations go buck wild situation to basically to ram through and get as much technocratic infrastructure in place as possible, as quickly as possible. It's made me like look back at my left-wing politics, my left-wing roots, I guess you would say, right? Like I like more, and this because I've talked, we talk, at some level, they really did have a problem with some form of workers' power that was a check on, however we want to parse that, because I know you can go, you're anarchist, you're communist, you're socialist, you're democratic. So, just like I laid out on the right. And by the way, then this gets back to your point, like strategy of tension works both ways, right? So all those disparate parts on the left that argue about the role of the state and things like that, like, the degree to which you should have private property, like all those groups ultimately, certainly now at this stage in the game, they're all galvanized together, at least tentatively in opposition to Trump and the right wing and the right. I mean, so and the reason why I said you sound like you're thinking more like me, or how I have thought is, we've talked about this. This is the basis of Anthony Sutton's research into the Order of Skull and Bones, right? And so when I'll just tell the story again for those who haven't ever heard it before, and it's probably been a long time since I told it on this show. So Anthony Sutton, he worked for the Hoover Institute, okay, and he did a series called Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. And at some point, it's a 3-volume series. At some point during his research, basically, he discovers like that essentially we were funding the Soviet Union, and we did a lot to basically build them up to become the formidable adversaries that they became ultimately. I believe it was the 3rd volume where it's been a while since I've gone over the history of it, but where they basically said, Anthony, don't break your rice bowl. Meaning, you don't want to publish this, like you're going to ruin your academic career, right? And then he goes ahead and does that. And then he basically, from then on, he's trying to figure out, who did I anger? What men behind the curtain did I disturb such? The story goes that eventually one day he gets those catalogs back there on that shelf. There's 3 of them. She gets them from Charlotte Iserbyt, my mentor, who wrote forward to my book, School World Order. She was her father and grandfather were members of the Order of Skull and Bones. What he discovers in there is that a lot of the people that showed up in his research into the American funding of the Soviet Union showed up in the order. But he also noted that, well, what also showed up was a lot of these people in the order also funded the Nazis during World War II as well. I can't remember the particular. So with the Nazis, I know well because I've written thoroughly about it. I haven't spent so much time. I know Ruscom Bank was one of the banks that was funded, and I can't remember which of the Bonesmen it was that funded it. But if you read his book, and mine, it's mentioned in mine. And then as far as on the right, one of them was Prescott Bush was involved. It was Brown Brothers Harriman. Was the bank, and it was tied through like Fritz Tyson, people like Knight Woolley. These are the Bonesmen: Knight Woolley, E. Roland Harriman, and there's another one in there. But anyways, this is all to lay out that what he saw was that what they both had in common is Hegelianism. Right. And so, people like Friedrich Trendelenburg on the right would, Hegel's philosophies, right, would basically go out in 2 directions. Right. One of them becomes his idea. He had the concept of dialectical idealism. Right. It's the idea that history evolves through competing ideas. OK, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Right. And then Marx says, the idea part is nonsense. It's material. The ideas come after. That's just what capitalists and ruling class people use to justify, right, their domination of it's really a dialectic between haves and have-nots, the material, right? But you go in 2 sort of different directions, but what they both have in common is the idea of evolution towards it's not just the evolution of the sort of towards utopia or like the perfected state, but also the perfected human being. So the idea here is that in both of these, there's an evolutionary process. This is actually where you get, I mean, Hegel's influence on not just economics in the two threads that I've just laid out, right? The Marxist and what becomes sort of the base, essentially the fascist, but in psychology, in law, in biology, right? Like the idea of evolution, that concept, that's his idea. It's like we always kind of anchor it to like Darwin, because that's like where we've sort of been kind of colloquialized, but like his whole idea was that synthesis process was, right, you have these competing things, right? And today sometimes people talk about the pendulum. For him it's not a pendulum, it's if you look at it two-dimensionally, it looks like going back and forth, but if you look at it above, it's a circle, and it's a spiral that goes upwards, right? It has a telos, like it's going somewhere, right? And so for Darwin, he said, right, you had competing species, right? That's the dialectic of species that evolves the genetics, right? Even in Freudian psychology, you have essentially a dialectic between the superego and the id, right? Like sort of the morals that you get from like culture and society, and like your libidinal, like, you know, base sort of the passions of your nervous system, right? And the tension between those comes out is your ego. And this is the nature of case law, right? The case law evolved as opposed to natural law, where law is based on principles. In case law, it's the idea that the dialectic between the rulings of the different judges, right? The synthesis of that creates what is the new position. I mean, the whole, right? And so for me, the reason why I'm laying all this out is that ultimately, I mean, this is an anachronistic term, but I'm gonna use it now because it's relevant to the modern space. All of these things are accelerationist. You know what I'm saying? So like, you're a physicist, Andy, you can probably explain this better than I can, but right, if you have tension on 2 points, right, if you have 2 centrifugal forces, right, they can sort of, right, they work almost like a dynamo, right? So it's that tension isn't just like, it's not just tension that's keeping pressure on the stuff in the inside, but those competing forces are creating an acceleration. The further and further these things are polarized, right, the more energy, the more friction that it, and the more the faster the wheels turns, which means the faster the spiral moves. And so like ultimately, I mean, because here, look, forget Sutton. They immediately after World War II go, hey, we just beat the Nazis. There's the Soviet Union. Hey, Nazis, help us. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, immediately. Like, so you know, and this is the part where, you know, when we talk more about things like, you know, this is going to sound woo-woo right now, but when I walk you through it, it's not going to sound like that. But like chaos magic and meme magic on the far right today. And this might need to be another episode to really unpack that part. But that's the best I can, I mean, that's the best I could probably describe it. Because like now that I'm looking at it, like I'm kind of already seeing like following this thread, like a left wing kind of going to be the response to this whole Trump thing. Now that a lot of how we got to this place is going to be okay to talk about some of it, right? And there's going to be people that grift on that, and they're going to become trusted people, and these people are going to eventually steer you into a left. Like people talking about like something like, you know, these are phrases. I mean, these are old phrases, but like it's interesting that I hear them more, like fully automated luxury communism, UBI style, like lean into the technocracy. And, you know, from a left-wing perspective, like I think that the right now is they're the break stuff and fix it later administration. They're going to go and put their foot on the gas with AI and everything so fast, keeping everybody scared and fighting each other, and right under the strategy of tension and random terror and then by the time they've got it in place further enough, they can go and pretend like they're gonna make it ethical and equitable, and and that'll just be another turn on the thing. But I just so that's what I think. That's what I think. And I think that much of the Cold War was designed, that the dialectic there was the dialectic between communism and capitalism, that the East and the West was, it put not just a strategy of tension on the domestic populations of those superpowers, but it also created the strategy of tension where they were able to carve up and decolonialize much of the so-called third world. If you were one of these countries in Latin America or Africa or Southeast Asia, pick a team. You know what I mean? And at the end of it, it's, if everybody is at least fits it in, at least into one block or another, you have two antipodes that can be accelerated. You can't accelerate with too much stuff going all over the place because you can't get the feedback loop the same way. There was a quote in one of those articles you gave us from Brzezinski. I don't know if you picked up on that. Did you read all the way through the?
Yeah.
And there's one in there where he says, right? I mean, eventually we just, in a technocracy, we need to over time integrate East and West. So that's, I know that was on and on and on, but that's the best I could make sense of it.
Michael or Eduardo, do you want to come in on anything you've heard so far? Michael? Okay.
I do just want to point out, you had asked a specific question before I had chimed in, Andy, so maybe you want to come back on the.
No, I mean,
I just want to hear what you think.
No, I kind of get what you're saying, Jake, in relationship to what I'm asking back then, that it's, if I was going to put it in physics terms, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, the Newton's third law. And so if you want the strong reaction, you insert a strong action, and it's within that. It's within that action that you put the cause, and then you get the effect. It's within that energy that you're able to control society using that energy. Maybe one of the problems I have with it is it still leaves out, essentially, like, I see that as an operation played from above. It doesn't speak to what's happening below, but I'll put that aside for now. A question that comes to mind for me, and I do want to come to today then, when we talk about Operation Gladio, because after World War II, there is a working class movement in Europe. There are people who were resistance fighters. There are armed workers who fought for their own liberation against the Nazis, who represent a problem for existing European powers. And Operation Gladio, those Nazis who were re-empowered, were going to take those people out if they took their resistance fighting too seriously and thought that was to do anything other than kill Nazis. If you think you're going to go in and try to build a workers' power here now in Europe, forget it. We're taking you out, and we're not going to let the Soviets come in and try to use you or whatever. We are going to make sure that you don't get any wrong ideas about what you were fighting for. You weren't fighting for your liberation. You were fighting for U.S. hegemony. And let's just, if I was going to put it another way. But that's after World War II. They needed Operation Gladio. I look at the situation today where I don't see a workers' movement. And I wonder, why do they even need anything like an Operation Gladio 2.0? In the absence of what I don't see any resistance, like from below. I see United States and Europe on one side. I get it, Russia and China, and each is going to be able to control their population through this war World War III, and they're each going to be able to use all the things that are fermented out of this to build control for themselves. But we're not at the same situation. Where is the threat that they're seeing that would mean that they have to do Operation Gladio 2.0? I guess that's a question I have.
That's okay. Then that's a nice segue for me to just continue. So I started this off by saying the main goal is police state, not just police state like jackboots, like pre-crime police state. Okay. So whether or not there's a threat that somebody's going to do anything, they want the threat. They want there to be a threat. And that's the other reason why I was saying, especially like, folks on the left, be a little more careful with words. All of that works into their narrative building. Psychological operations it's all about narrative. It's all about narrative based on optics. They got the AI whole thing basically in place. Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's as wonderful or as effective as they say it is, but like, I just visited y'all out there. Everything was like what 80-90% of the signs were AI everything. That's AI. I'm like old McDonald, right? Like, so now
with an AI here and an AI there, here an AI there, and everywhere an AI.
What? Okay, at this point, the fact that what's doing to the economy and brain rot and just et cetera. Okay, but those are their own problems. But if we just parked it here and we don't go to like social credit and like pre-crime and like that type of stuff, I don't know. Maybe that's not quite a dystopia. Maybe that's something that, I might not totally disdain living in, like a Brave New World or something, right? Like I'm just like, well, how do you get that next thing? I mean, you have to have the narrative that, oh no, there's terrorists everywhere, and the way that you do that is you got to have somebody at least do something, or at least get them close to doing something, or at least frame it so it looks like they're going to do something, right? And I'll also say this: I think that part of why you don't see an actual workers' movement on the left is the same reason why you don't see any kind of a functional movement on the right, and that is that any momentum that left or right has is reducible to opposition to the other amorphous thing that is left or right. But I bet you that if there wasn't the divide on the left and there was an actual class-based consciousness workers movement, like I think if anything what they'd be afraid of is a general strike or something like that along those lines. Like so that's why you don't see that. So in other words, it is a product of why you don't see that is a product of the strategy of tension. And that's the same thing on the other side. It was about, let's radicalize the anarchists and the communists and the socialists, and let's radicalize them in ways that emphasizes their differences, right? But let's keep them tied together around opposition to the right. I mean, and I laid it out in the same way with the right. So that's why you don't see it. That's an effect of that. But yeah. So that's I mean that's I'll stop there.
Eduardo or Michael?
I'm still trying to catch
And
up.
one more thing, real quick. Oh, sorry, no, go
ahead. Go ahead. What was it?
No, go.
Ask a question, Eduardo.
He's still kind of trying to catch up. It's all right.
I was just gonna say that, and one more. I was just gonna say, and then what it's been reduced to is that, right? If there's any momentum to the left, it's opposition to the right, and it's unnecessarily militant, like the Antifa, Black Lives Matter type stuff, right? It's like right, like just burn it all down. It's accelerationist. It's left-wing accelerationist. That's what it is. I mean, in my opinion, and that plays into their game. That gives them a boogeyman. It gives them another category of person to call terrorist. That inflames the right to go, we need to be Christian fascists, right? We need to be the antipode to that. We need to meet the same type of energy with the same type of energy. And so I just wanted to add that. So it's not just that it's reducible to amorphous resistance to the right, but it's a violent type of radicalized acceleration that only begets itself and plays into their hand. And this also plays into the I'm sorry, I'm going on, but like this whole thing, like Trump's fighting the deep state. Well, in other words, he's tearing down all the things that are bad, right? I mean, like that's the idea, right? Like, so in other words, like if you're going to install a technocracy and you're going to upend an entire system, whatever our system was, if you wanted to radically overhaul it and basically just totally upend it and not look like you were overthrowing the country, well, you could say like, oh, look at the deep state. You could expose the things that you've done over the years and be like, look at all this bad stuff. And then you have a reason to basically be an authoritarian, right? Now, if you have the constitutionalist half of the country that's like supposed to actually want to protect the traditions of the country that are happy to tear it down because they're fighting the deep state, and you have the other half of the country that basically always wanted to have a revolution, what do you have? You have two halves of a country that their entire MO is just tear down the system. Everybody to participate in that, they'll use that energy to make sure that what's installed is the thing they want at the end of it. That's what I think is going on right now. I mean, that's what I think is going on right now. Overall,
I gotta say, I wish I knew about some actual Antifa stuff, or I think that I feel like part of the characterization you're giving of the current left is kind of like a little bit like there's no BLM or Antifa, like it barely exists, and even when it did, it actually mainly had mild, right? So I guess I feel like part of what I'm understanding from this is that I see these basically the only reason why they have to lie is because they are worried about people. They are worried about people's public opinion. They're not just trying to galvanize people's opinions so that they can somehow implement things. If they weren't actually worried about what people would do, or that people could actually rise up and stop them, then they wouldn't need any of this, right? They don't, and I think it's sort of like the elites. I don't see elites as, elites are also the result of a process. They're not just like a static thing that always existed that just wants to impose a police state. They have to strive for a police state in order to maintain their position, right? So there is an element of the material reality that drives the development of these things. And if, so like, yes, they want to polarize people along the axis that suits them, right? Absolutely. And that is exactly specifically what Operation Gladio did, right? To bring it back. They basically, would carry out a terrorist attack, make it look like it was the left, right? But the real left actually mostly wasn't demanding that, right? Like there's a real actual impulse that contradicts what the elites are trying to do. And by framing it by seeing it within the context of the economic dynamic of capitalism, it helps to see why it keeps reproducing itself in this way, but also why people actually generally don't like it, right? So like the people are not just, there's some agency of people on below, which is why they have to maintain these narratives, right? It's not just that that this is just what the ruling class wants. It's that the ruling class sees a problem with people actually asking for what they really want. And if it wasn't threatened by that, they wouldn't have to secretly fund I think they're trying to get to a place where everybody just accepts the police state. And they've actually gone a long way, right? They prefer not to have even a semblance of democracy, like this guy, what's his name? Was it Ellison who said that? He's like, basically, we shouldn't have to go begging people but at the same time, there is a threat from below to them. That is why they have to do this stuff. And doesn't make any sense to me if there's no real threat from below, if they don't perceive a threat from below, that it doesn't make any sense why they would do all this stuff. So I think that this is what I also think that equating sort of communism and fascism is misses a key part, which is that fascism did not require a revolution from below. Okay, communism, like the actual Russian Revolution, in order for that Soviet state to become the repressive thing it did, like they had to actually have a real revolution. That then was actually defeated, right? So, I think so. There's some interesting debates I think to explore here, and actually even related to the philosophical stuff you mentioned, John, because I think that the Hegelian part is tied to this idea of, like, it seems like we're always trying to get somewhere, right? It's teleological, like you were saying, or that there's a place we always got to get to. We got to get better and better and better and better. And part of the root of that, I do feel, has a material basis, which is in like a struggle against scarcity that becomes a struggle for accumulation, which now has this whole economic apparatus driving people to accumulate more. So we must get better, right? And this is why, with specifically the onset of capitalist production, you have a huge increase in the science of productivity and a huge, this drive to accumulate more and more and more. That there's a real economy underneath this that does set the parameters and drives and fundamentally drives it. And in the end, they have to put a lot of effort into convincing people to go along with it. And the left-right axis, to me, is not like everyone wants to burn it down. They want people to be angry, but they want all the anger to be pointed at the wrong person, right? So to me, the left-right axis is basically anything that's not a class, anything that's not like putting things at putting anger at the people with actual power. They want that. So yeah, everybody can be mad at Trump, and it's true. To me, the completely captured, pointless left is all organized against Trump. That, to me, is where we fully agree. Like the whole like hating Trump thing is essentially a psyop, right? Just like, but that to me is also like that's the two-party system in the United States, and their left and right poles are kind of organized around these two political parties. But in the end, I don't see why they would need to do it if people's actual real human impulses were not somehow against what they were trying to do.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, well, I mean, for one, let me just to clarify. Obviously, I'm using a heuristic to describe the bulk of the momentum on those two antipodes of political discourse. I don't mean to include every idiosyncratic position, right? And I don't even know which one I am supposed to belong to from one day to the other, or whatever that is.
It's lost some cachet lately, I gotta say.
I mean, look, as a human being, I don't want to live in a dystopia. And as a journalist, whoever's got the football is the guy the man or woman that it's my job to point out what they're doing wrong. And you know what I mean? Like, you know, and if it looks like if it looks like I'm zigzagging or something, maybe it's just your eyes don't know how to, not you. I'm just saying, like, I don't, but
sure.
I'm saying all that to say that to your point, the Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and and to be fair, we haven't seen any of that type of activity since like lockdowns. But like, I'm sure that is the same percentage as like the far right neo-Nazi, Groyper, Nick Fuentes. Those are the extremes, and those are like the sigils. The sigils, the antennas that are held up that create the polarizing, like, and if you're on the other team, most of what you think about the other side is filtered through that extreme caricature. But and then the whole thing about, I mean, we could, me and Andy have had many discussions about the difference between communism and fascism. That might be another episode. But Yeah, I guess that's all I needed to really to know. But this is a good point to build off my zigzag thing, or like where am I at? Like right now, if I was going to do something that was going to check or correct or right the ship from the direction that the vector is currently veering, you could call that a left wing move. You could say that it would look like a left wing thing. It's certainly at this place in the game. Like maybe during the Obama years, you could have made an argument that maybe something that looked like opposing that regime looked like a zag to the right. Okay, whatever. But so a left wing move on the chessboard right now might look like a move that they don't want, that they don't like. Yes, that's a real thing, but like you're saying, like, I don't see why they would need to create all this. Like that's why I was saying about there's different phases. There was different phases in Gladio proper. And if we want to call this another phase of it, the stakes are different. So, I mean, like, I really think that they need as many boogeymen as possible. Eventually, by the way, I think it's going to come back around on the right. It's going to be like the Groyper types, like those far right people, the ones that you could legit call anti-Semite, that like, you know, that aren't anti-Zionist, but are anti-Jewish, right? Like eventually, like they're like remember in Gladio, like it wasn't, they didn't necessarily want to like be Nazis, but they wanted to use Nazis, right? And in that BBC documentary, there was one guy that was like, I don't think it was Galen, it was somebody. He's like, hey, this guy's a Nazi, and they're like, yeah, we know, but he's useful now. We'll deal with him later. Whether or not they did, it's another thing, right? But the point is, like, the boogeyman right now, it's useful for it to be the left, because if there was going to be that move on the chessboard, it would come from that angle, and it would be something that would put some check on capital at this stage in the game, right? Especially when you think about like not just what they're doing, but like the Curtis Yarvin philosophy behind it and the Nick Land philosophy behind all of that. Like, and we could talk more about what that means, but go ahead.
Well, again, I'll come back to you. Eduardo, do you have anything you want to say? Because I'm going to say maybe something in response to that.
I mean, I have thoughts about a few things that Jake has said, but I'm not too sure if it's the discussion. So
you want to try and just see where it goes?
There's go.
I think it's just too much to take in with
stop,
all.
Man, at some point, come on now, give it to me. Sorry.
No, you were saying about the Antifa. I was thinking as you were saying, like, how big or how strong is the neo-Nazi movement? It may not be as strong, but it comes from a lineage that was strong. It did come from Germany, where they had a very organized governance. And I'm wondering, did Antifa come from an organized government? Did it come from a certain country? Did it come from some sort of, does it follow a line of inherited power or desire for organization to try to change a movement or to try to, I don't see that. And on the right, I think most people characterize themselves as conservative to Christian values, especially in the USA. And I'm thinking, goodness, the church has been very strong for millennia. So I'm thinking, it's comparing. As we were talking, I said this to Andy. In a separate episode, I don't know. Sometimes Andy will say that the left is just as and I'm trying to stay away from this left and right paradigm, but I'm thinking how the left-wing politics, liberal, progressive politics have only risen since how long ago? How long has academia started this wokeness culture, and compare that to the right that has for how long in history pride themselves in for beholding themselves the Christian values of the church, and how has that, in comparison, what traditions here are we looking at that have long been quite outlived a lot? So I'm not sure if these can be comparable. Not to say that woke leftist politics aren't threatening, because I do think they are. It doesn't dismiss that I also think they're threatening, and they're trying to control us by speech, censorship, And so I'm not trying to dismiss that part out either. But that was my thought as you were both speaking. And since everyone here is trying to ask me to what was I thinking, what do you just share, so again, this might be another rabbit hole.
No. I think that's an okay place because, like, okay, oh, I got too many things, dude. Like sometimes
we just
I have so many great thoughts.
This is why I did not want to discuss this, and I didn't want to bring this up. It's like, let's just carry on.
No. It's relevant.
Cut this out.
Because
those were my thoughts. I was thinking, Jake,
okay, here it is.
What
Right. Here's what I think.
Organized government. What government was Antifa? You know.
Right. But could you say the same thing about maybe like some of the ANCAPs? Like the anarcho-capitalists? Does that come out of a state tradition, a statist tradition, I guess? Is what I guess my question. Like would be the antipode.
I don't know. I have to see. I haven't.
Well, here's the thing that I think that like left and right, like in their totalitarian versions of technology. Look, we could revisit one of my pieces that we've not touched on for a while. It was really a profile piece about this woman, Barbara Marx Hubbard, but the concept of conscious evolution, which, by the way, I didn't understand until I got to the end of that series. It's actually an Alice Bailey concept, right? So it's primarily actually a new age occult concept. I don't want to get into the whole thing about Hegel and Hermeticism or whatever, but we've talked about this. Remember back in the day when certain people on the left, when you and I first met, and I was writing some stuff, and there was people that didn't like they didn't like the term techno-fascist. You remember that? Like left wing, they were like that term. Like I'm like, what do you mean? Like when I said it on RBN, Nick Cruz was like, well, I don't know why anybody would have a problem with that, because that's just what happened. I mean, when capital, continues to accelerate and become more and more efficient, you know what I mean? That's what it does. Like, industry produces more efficient means of production. That's technology, right? And so it's just going to make more and more efficient technology. And, it was never said to me this way from their perspective, but I'm pretty sure it has everything to do with what Marx sort of intuited or surmised or predicted about. And then this is where in my opinion, like I think late stage capitalism is communism, is fascism, is technocracy, is nihilism, that's what I think. Because it's just all it is. It's the same evolution of technologic efficiency perceived from this side of the spiral and that side of the spiral. And that's why that's why the left didn't like that term at that time, or some of those people on the left didn't like that term, because for Marx, you had to, I know the Soviet Union sort of flipped that on its head, or, proved it not to be the case. But, right, the idea was that in his theory, first you had to have capitalism develop to a certain stage of industrialism so that the means of production could become distributable in such a way. So, but part of that is, it's not just industry, it is the aggregate of industrial evolution, which is mechanization and automation. And that's just a precursor to digital automation. So this is why you have people, like I said, that I've come across talking about like an attainable solution to the dark enlightenment, Curtis Yarvin's GovCorp, the techno-monarchical, corporate fascist, techno-feudal system is something like a fully automated luxury communism. It's still a technocracy. You're still going to have your human existence intermediated through algorithms and machines that are owned not by you, by a company, by the state, by a global collective. I don't know who knows what they'll call it from that, but it'll still be the same system. Now, will it be more equitable? Will you get a bigger UBI? Maybe you get a bigger UBI on the left-wing version, but you can't say what you want. Maybe on the right-wing version, you could run your mouth however you want, but you could barely feed yourself. You know what I mean? I don't know. But I'm saying my point in this is that that's what they both have in common. That's what and that's the Hegelian element. That's the conscious evolution element. This is where cybernetics becomes the driver, not just for conscious evolution, not just for the evolution of capital, technology, right? Capital being this thing that, right, to Michael's point, it has to capitalism has to have profit. If you don't have a certain profit, It's not enough to just hold your space. That's like you're dying in capitalism if you're just holding your maintaining your same revenue stream, right? First, I don't want to get too far into a call. For someone like Nick Land, like it's this hyperstitional. That is the dry. You're like the telos is the endless pursuit of more. That is evolution. That profit and evolution are part of the same psychic, the algorithm between the ideal and the material. That the capitalist drive for profit, that to consume more and more is what drives the evolution of the technology, and that this whole thing is towards the cybernetic evolution of the global brain, the transhuman species. All this is what I mean by acceleration, all towards the same end, ultimately. Well, I'm going to stop there, but with transitioning from old school COINTELPRO and old school MK Ultra, where you had like propaganda through broadcast media and human intel or infiltrate groups, like now you have like the algorithmic subversion of the human mind, the interactive internet activity style propaganda mixed with meme magic and other stuff. And this is where I want to touch on at some point when we talk about the Nazis that were holdovers during Gladio in the first phase, and the paperclip types, and the people that were brought to, Argentina and Brazil and over here, and et cetera, were real Nazis. They were part of the Nazi party. A lot of the Nazis in the current Gladio mind war situation are LARPers. And they use it as I'm saying they're using the cultural capital of the symbol as for rage bait. This is why they're always really into the edgelord comedy, where being as hyper inflammatory, because it's all about accelerating. It's all about accelerating. It's like Hitler is like the devil for people that don't believe in God. You know what I mean? It's an archetype, and the swastika is an archetype. It's something that pulls out the antipodal accelerationist militant energy from that blob thing that we're calling the left, that is the caricature of the left that is put out there for people to participate in. I'm gonna shut up now. I'm sorry.
Well, I definitely think we've touched on Operation Gladio, and I think we've gone a lot of different places from there that people can make what they will of it. But what has happened for me in this conversation, from talking here and listening to you, Jake and Michael, and I do appreciate what you're asking there, Eduardo. Things are very confusing for me, I will say. I'm a Marxist. I'm an anti. I believe that capitalism is a systemic problem that needs to be dealt with by humans, if we're going to be surviving. I do believe that one of the ways people have fallen off is to Marx talks about the means of production, but he also talks about the working class. And I think we've become very seduced by the means of production. We've become very much focused on these developments. And I would say this is a criticism I make of revolutionaries from the left, for the socialist tradition or communist tradition or anarchist tradition. And I think that our focus on those means of production in itself was an expression of the developing alienation that takes place under capitalism, because the possibility of revolution was always not from the means of production, it's from the working class itself, from the organization of that, and from the potential unity of it. And I know there are going to be people who listen to this who don't like that I don't buy this left-right division. But I do believe left-right has been a part of one. The left-right divide is just one divide among many used to divide the working class. And I think the answer I currently have to that question of, like, why would you even need a Gladio 2.0, as I've listened to you, it has brought me back to Fabio Vigi, who does talk about where capitalism as a system is right now. It's not in the same place it was coming out of World War II, where it had a growing phase. It is at its dying phase. It's at a dying phase, but the people who have, the organizations and people who have lived off of it who live in Russia, these elites in Russia, or capitalists in Russia, or capitalists in China, or capitalists in Europe, or capitalists in the United States, they're having to hold this thing together, or take it to some place where they are still ruling at the end. So in many ways, despite the fact that, in my opinion, there's not enough struggle to justify Gladio 2.0, there possibly is enough crisis or enough problems in the system to justify 2.0. And I agree with you, John. They are trying to take us somewhere that is radical. Not radical like we've never been there before, not radical in the sense of getting to the root of the problem, but transformative in a way that we like. There was a quote that the capitalists, I can't remember where it came from, but it was either US capitalists had said out of the 1970s, how we're going to have to figure out how to get the US worker to accept way less than they used to expect before, like coming out of the 40s and 50s and 60s, as they considered where they were and what was happening to the state of capitalism. Like in the next 10 years, we're going to have to get them to lower their expectations dramatically. And I do feel like that's the sort of thing they're thinking about, not just in terms of wages and living standards, but on a whole, in a whole way that the world is being transformed. And they do have a project in front of them that requires dramatic events in order to get us to acquiesce and not squirm while we're put into this little hole. The only thing I'll say, this sometimes I hear it from you, and I guess we'll have to continue this conversation right now, is I sometimes feel like in our squirming, in our moving about to try to get out of this shackle, you're almost saying that any energy we put into that squirming, they're going to use against you. So it's almost hopeless to squirm even. I don't think you believe that. I don't know if you believe that. I know I don't believe that, but I do believe they are doing judo all the time. And I agree with you that any action we make, they are going to come about and try to do it. But I don't come to the conclusion, and I don't think you come to the conclusion that it is, because obviously you wouldn't be writing your book and you wouldn't have it in Japan or whatever. But there's a way that thinking that any move you make will be used against you is a way that we can think of this strategy of tension that they're utilizing. I do think there's potential resistance that's going to have to get around that somehow, if we're gonna save humanity. So I wonder what you would say about that.
Look, it was always told to me in, martial arts, one of my instructors, every move has a counter, every counter has a counter. And by the way, every move has multiple counters, right? And if you were to sit there, and if I were to sit there and like a decision tree, like break down a sparring session, just at one round, like and if I were to like slow it down and explain to you all the different options that go through my head, I would lay that out on paper. Someone would be like, how could you expect me to like, it sounds like I look at that and I see that no matter what I do, yeah, because every move has a counter and every counter has a counter. So it's something that's unavoidable, right? I use that analogy because you want to talk about feeling tension. You're in the moment. One of the things I missed about sparring, I was doing a little bit of ran into a friend and got busy or whatever, but it was like, it's the only time I get out of my head. It's the only time I don't have a million things going on, thoughts, ideas going. It's the only time when stuff is happening too quick and with high enough stakes, risks, dangers that you're just making the next move. You're constantly, it's an interesting space especially for somebody that spends so much time in their head to even be able to realize like, wow, like you can actually move through time and space making decisions without words in your head sometimes, like and if I go back and do it, I can, if I reflect on it, I could catch certain thoughts. But the point is that it's the same type of a game. I mean, fighting is a single martial arts. Combat sports is essentially full contact chess, right? So it's just as many moves, if not more, but right, super high stakes. Like, so I'll say that everything I said about right and left, and what happens when right goes right, and what happens when left goes left, and what does right do when left goes left, and what does left go when right, all of that. I still go back to what I said. It's like right now, the moves to be made right now are from the left side of the chessboard. And so to Michael's point, there is a real threat in some sort of a legitimate class-based left-wing move on the chessboard. I don't know how to make that move, dude. I don't have any, you know what I mean? Like, I don't even, most of the traction, whatever, most of the outlet, I don't even know what you call it when you're one dude that's a writer and just is like trying to, whoever wants to know and whoever, I'll help you use the information, it's mainly been people on the right, or what, on the thing called the right. But the reason why I want you to know this, the reason why I feel it's important to lay out all of those very confusing pieces on the chessboard, is that one is you got to know what moves can be made. In order for me to anticipate your counters, I have to know how many you have, and I have to know how many moves can be made. How many moves can you chunk based on other moves? And then being able to know when you're being baited into certain moves, and knowing what those moves entail, so that you can avoid them, right? So that you can move your pieces from that left side of the chessboard without getting countered. Mm-hmm. Right? That's why, especially, you all are my friends, I've known you for a long time, Andy. I love you. I don't want nothing bad to happen to you guys. You know what I mean? Be around the wrong person or use your rhetoric infelicitously. So I'm saying that I want you guys to know this as my friends, so that you can make appropriate moves on your little individual chessboards. But for people listening, I think that knowing all of those different moves, is all you can do is mitigate and minimize how many ways you can get countered. You got to take risks just to get in the ring. You have to, you know what I mean? You're gonna get hit. Unless you go out and you get lucky and you catch them right away, you're gonna get hit. It's gonna happen. All right. You don't want to get hit. But so all you can do is minimize and mitigate. You know what I mean? So
I want to say I really appreciate that analogy, and that that is kind of a frame that I've been thinking about for a while, which is, unfortunately, the elites have been learning from their games in a more or less coherent way and building their methods of domination. And what we have, and we don't have that same kind of mechanism of learning. That, so it's almost like, sometimes I feel like it's like every newly radicalized working class person is like a white belt that has only other white belts around them to try and go up against, the black belts, who are all in the elites, but I do also want to make it clear, like, the concept of left and right are, I would characterize them that they are now political poles that are consciously cultivated and manipulated as part of these levers of control. So I appreciate your, and these are the moves they make, right? They'll bait you over here, just like in, my limited experience with jujitsu. Is like, you might have a whole sequence of moves where you're trying to get them to try and maybe, like, you're going to fake, like, oh, you're going to take my back. And now actually I'm going to, it was all just a setup to armbar you or whatever, that kind of strategic understanding is something that, if we're going to have any successful resistance to this paradigm we're being pushed into, it will have to be able to see those kinds of things. And what was considered left or what was considered right has shifted now. At one point it would have been considered left to refuse, to refuse this idea of, a vaccine passport or whatever. I mean, the whole thing is they've been able to just scramble all of these things up and corral people into these kind of more and more not meaningfully, we're not, left and right is less and less meaningfully counterposed. And so I do, but I do think that there is, in terms of this jujitsu or this fighting there is a, there is a weakness, which is we are many, they are few. And that's why, I agree. Things like general strikes, things like strikes, it's sort of like that's the move the workers have that the capitalists really are. And in my mind, that's the thing they're really thinking ahead to prevent ever from happening, is to have the people who are actually doing the labor shut it down, right? And that's even partially, a big part of why they're driving this AI stuff, is they don't want these goddamn humans doing their collective thing. They want us to do the thing they want us to do. So I think that there's actually a lot of value in that analogy of that it's like sparring, but to bring in that element of hope is that there also is a weakness. And that's exactly the thing they're the most afraid of, which is why they try and polarize us along all these ridiculous culture wars, and which is that we can actually potentially shut down production and reopen it for our own, and that doesn't even seem like a left-wing thing anymore to me, honestly. Like, what is considered left now is not even like basic, is not even about like fun, like reorganizing things so people can have the things they need, right? It's much more about these ideologies of identity, and that's why it's also so weak. That's why the real potency of what used to be the left, the element of the left that was actually rooted in class antagonism, has been, basically destroyed. And which is why I don't think they're so, they're not dismantling our workers movement. Now they're preventing it. And now they're going to get everyone to go along with, like Andy said, a real reduction in the standard of living people have come to be used to. So like specific, yeah. So just to bring it back, just to say, like, specifically cultivating anger along these opposing poles is, like, I believe, a known strategy that goes back centuries, right? And was explicitly in the phase right after World War II, was specifically implemented through Operation Gladio and called the strategy of tension. Right, and that strategy of tension was essentially to polarize things in a way that they could control. It's fascinating and to see how that is evolving, and I look forward to learning more about it.
And you just kind of made me think of something that I hadn't thought of yet. Well, one thing, I mean, that I have thought of quite a bit is that the fact that they've used Gladio, and in my opinion, we didn't even itemize. I didn't have time. I should have took time and just gone through how many crazy events, we'll call them, have happened since dude got elected in 2024, and then just in the last several months. In my opinion, this is another phase of the same type of operation. All right. So, but the fact that they do that illustrates that they're more comfortable with dealing with that type of militant, whether contrived or not, resistance, not just because it gives them the impetus, the moral high ground to crack down, but because they're more scared of a general strike. And there's a large bulk of people that would be part of a general strike that you would never get to be part of a militant revolution, right? They don't want to do that. Violence is not a thing that they're willing to do. I'm one of those people. I think it does two things. I mean, it does three things, really, is that it creates the boogeyman. It polarizes and creates justification to crack down, but it also weakens the possibility of a general strike, I think, overall, altogether. And one other thing I want to note about Gladio is that when they assassinated Aldo Moro, you might look at it and go like, oh, it's because he was sympathetic to the communists. But another way to look at it is that actually it was that he brought together the Christian Democrats, not brought together, but he at least brought them in a space where they could have some kind of dialogue. And I think maybe the lesson there is also that, something like with Fred Hampton, You know what I mean? Like, I mean, yeah, socialist, the left, yes, but like, you know, was willing to organize with the Young Patriots. I think it's those types of bridge builders that like, to your point, that a general strike necessarily entails that you'd have to bring together, right? All the disparate factions that they have sort of galvanized into two left and right antipodes. I don't know. Maybe that's another thing to note in the Gladio lesson is I think that peaceful resistance is the thing that they're most scared of, and it's the one that unites all these different factions that they are intentionally polarizing against each other. You know, Michael's talking about what he's looking at these operations and looking at trying to extrapolate what they appear to be scared of and using that as like a way to look at. Those are the things that I would say, or I would note that they're most scared
of. Maybe we should call it a day then.
Yeah, that's good.
Eduardo, do you want me to wrap up, or do you have, actually, Eduardo, before we do you have any last comments? Eduardo.
No, I think we've delved into so many areas. We're good here. I think I see a lot of threads that we could potentially follow up on. I think it's getting late, and so thank you. I don't say that because I don't think this is important. I say that because I think that we have enough substantive work here. So
I want to say, Jake, thank you for bringing up Operation Gladio as something to look into. I've just, in the reading I did, just like Michael, it made me think about a lot of different things in ways that I hadn't thought about them before, and just made me informed about what people call conspiracy, I suppose, but also just what the CIA kind of is at one level. We're beginning to understand what something like the CIA is and its roots in institutional power. It was very meaningful to kind of get that kind of, it's not something I'd learned before. Let's put it this way.
I'll add to that, made me think differently about what is illegal and what is considered crime.
Yeah. And now with all this drug, particularly with the drug war stuff being talked about, the irony is insane.
Yeah, there's a whole, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. Well, maybe that's another episode. Maybe that's another episode.
Yeah.
But I would.
You got to come back out here so we can, walk and talk. Yeah, ride in Waymo. Have a.
Well, you were going to say.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to come visit y'all sometime again soon. Eduardo, you got to find a way to get up there.
Maybe y'all should come over here, since there's a family of flamingos that have just visited this natural habitat here near my home.
Oh, all right. Well, you're inviting
It's been
me.
making a buzz here because
I'll let my wife know. I'll tell her.
Next week we're recording in Mexico.
Yeah. Nah, I need to sit still a little bit. Not quite. No traveling soon, hopefully. I would.
And Andy's still on vacation. Sorry.
Yeah.
Nah, I potentially I'd like to do, and I'll send you just a couple things. We're not gonna do it anytime soon. You can look at them, tell me if you're interested in it. But there's another layer to this that integrates the stuff we talked about with the keynote that I think will help put it in better perspective as far as like today. But in the meantime, and whatever, we'll talk about that. In the meantime, next time you see, just keep note. When you see like somebody shot, something blown up, car driven through a random, just think like, gee, how many is that? Now, you might even want to just keep a list of them and write them on your fridge or something. Just the name and the date and a couple of details so you remember them. And then think and look at them like how many of them were the official story is the official story. Like there's no other questions. And then one more thing is think, and what's the response to it? Remember, I'll end with this. You got Michael and maybe Andy too. Is like, what would the point be? Here's something very concrete. it was it after Kirk? I believe it was after Kirk. Around that time that they officially labeled Antifa, expanded their terrorism class designation. So anyway, but think about those things. Think about those things when you see these types of events in the coming, because unfortunately, hope I'm wrong. But I think 2026 is going to be wilder than 2025.
I agree too. I do believe that.
All this goes.
Yep.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you, as always, for being here with us. Jake. John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, Trend Day books, and he is a contributor of New Politics, the Center for Research on Globalization, Up-Ed News, the Interpret Report, the Dissident Voice, and Unlimited Hangout. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where you found this episode or on our blog, what'sthepodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. And you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact Andy through our blog, and he will always very diligently answer you. Thank you, Andy, always for that. I'm Eduardo Varca with co-hosts Michael and Andy, and as well as our fourth co-host, our audience, and John. Thank you always for contributing with your insights and also with the importance of all this, where we meet with so much controversy. But thank you for being here with us. Thank you all for listening, and check us out next time. Ciao.